Good evening, and thank you for coming to the Queen's Head Piccadilly on this windswept night here in Soho. To get to know, if you don't know her already, the poetry of Charlotte Mew. Charlotte Mew is one of the best, in my opinion, poets of the beginning of the 20th century, forgotten like many women until now when they're being rediscovered. Well known, but forgotten, you know, it happened. It happened to kids as well. So, if it's good for kids, it's good for anybody of us. Before we get to the literature, let me introduce who we are. I am Rafael Cruz. I have a small publishing house called Goldstar Books, specializing in poetry translation from Spanish into English, English into Spanish, Catalan, even French. I'm working on a book, French into English. Basically, is the area of translation as a medium between of understanding between cultures and people. But tonight is not that. Tonight is free. It's just not a book I'm publishing. It's just because I love Charlotte Mew and I'm spreading the gospel according to Charlotte. And we have here Kevin Harrison, who is my business partner in Goldstar Books. And I use business loosely because there's no money in poetry, or poetry and money. But we soldier on and managed to do things like tonight. And we've got here Di Sherlock, actress and playwright.
I will not be using that mic.
She's a professional like me. I'm a bloody amateur. Kevin is going to read the life of Charlotte, and Di is going to read her poems, and I'm just going to sit down and be pretty, as far as that's possible. Our wonderful venue here, Will, is the manager here of the... a big round of applause, please. Our wonderful venue, the Queen's Head in Soho, the last independent pub in Soho, I understand. And as I say to Will, this is like Asterix Gold Village, you know, surrounded by the empire of chain pubs and corporate things. And this is really the last of the Mohicans here. We are in an independent pub in Soho, and our lovely Will has allowed us to be here tonight to present the poetry of Charlotte Mew. And when he's not serving behind the bar or organizing things, he's also a poet. So it's all very good. We are in good company here. It helps Will and us if you drink. Because basically he runs a business, unlike me. I just run a poetry whorehouse, but it's not for profit. But he needs to pay a lot of overheads here, so please drink as much as you like downstairs. Sadly, the toilet is 2 floors down, so very convenient to go to the toilet and order another one. Anyway, there you are. I left it there. Okay, here is, well, if there is an emergency, of course, there will be an emergency and we will need to leave. It's not, there's not going to be a fake alarm, so hopefully, but we're not here for tragedy, unless it's the tragedy in the poems that we're going to read. So we're here for poetry. Well, anyway, if the alarm sings, I need to say that that's going to happen. And talking about singing, we have one song from the wonderful Linda Moylan over here. She is a wonderful singer, songwriter, and Ian Montague.
Montague.
Montague. You say Montague, I say Montague. Parce qu'il est pas français. Nous sommes Soho. They're going to play a song for us on the topic of mental health because that is something that recurs in the poetry of Charlotte Mew, and you're going to hear about that. Okay, I just want to add that some of the language that Kevin has written, because he's the script writer here, maybe offensive to modern ears, but that's just because he's going to be quoting ideas about mental health or whatever that nowadays would be unacceptable, but they were acceptable then in the beginning of the 20th century. So I hope that no offense is taken because none is intended. We are just the messengers repeating what we heard. Okay, and without further ado.
Thank you. I knew that. Can you hear me okay? Is this still working? 1, 2, 3. Yes, okay. I knew that line about possible offensive language would get everyone's attention, which is why we put it in at the end. So, let's start. Who was Charlotte Mew? Well, here are the bare facts of her life. She was born here in London 155 years ago, November 1869, just up the road in Bloomsbury, Mecklenburgh Square. She's one of 7 children. It was, for a time, a prosperous household. Her father was an architect. When she was a child, 3 of her brothers died. Later, another brother and a sister were committed to psychiatric hospitals where they would spend the rest of their lives. That left only Charlotte and her sister Anne, both of whom decided not to have children, partly in the hope of avoiding passing mental illness onto their descendants. In 1927, her sister Anne died of cancer. A few months later, Charlotte killed herself by drinking poison. It was March 1928. Now, you might think on the basis of these few sentences, you're in for a heavy evening here at the Queen's Head. And perhaps the next drink can't come soon enough. What our job is tonight is to persuade you that Charlotte Mew was a great writer, a wonderful poet, modern, relevant, and despite these basic facts of her life, the penciled outlines, if you like, the colouring in inside that pencil was rich and vibrant. And this little anecdote perhaps illustrates that and her sense of humour. Charlotte used to frequent the poetry bookshop in Bloomsbury, which was set up by Harold Munro, the publisher, just before the Great War. His wife and bookshop assistant, Alida Munro, saw this small, slight figure enter the shop and almost immediately merge with the book stock, her head down. It was November 1915. Intrigued by her appearance and suspecting her identity, Alida approached her. She said, "Are you Charlotte Mew?" To which the woman replied,
I'm afraid I am.
Self-deprecation, insecurity, it feeds into the prevailing image of Charlotte Mew, but there are other interpretations. We'll come back to Alida Munro, and we'll come back to that appearance of Charlotte that so attracted the attention of the bookshop owner. But now, our first poem of the evening, There Shall Be No Night There, in the Fields.
Across these wind-blown meadows, I can see the far-off glimmer of the little town and feel the darkness slowly shutting down to lock from day's long glare my soul and me. Then, through my blood, the coming mystery of night steals to my heart and turns my feet toward that chamber in the lamplit street where waits the pillow of thy breast and thee. There shall be no night there, no curtained pane to shroud love's speechlessness, and loose thy hair for kisses, swift and sweet as falling rain. No soft release of life, no evening prayer, nor shall we, waking, greet the dawn. aware that with the darkness we may sleep again.
There shall be no night. It's a quote from the Bible, Revelations chapter 22, verse 5. That same quote, as well as forming the basis of Charlotte's poem, also became a play by the American dramatist Robert E. Sherwood, written during World War II. And that phrase was taken up as a rallying call against the Nazi advance in 1940, especially in Finland and in Norway. For Charlotte Mew, though, There Shall Be No Night shows her recognition of her Christian Victorian upbringing, but it also shows her as a modern poet. She uses the poem to compare death with being a lover at night, the divine in love. She's an urban poet, and though the subtitle, In the Fields, shows she may be standing in the fields, it's the streetlights, the window panes, and the town at their centre she is looking at. So yes, she was born here in 1869. There were less Audis parked in the square in those days. It was a comfortable upbringing. Mecklenburgh Square, about a mile from this pub, a solid middle to upper class area. Her father was an architect, Frederick Mew. He designed various buildings in the capital, perhaps most famously Hampstead Town Hall. He also built Hampstead Vestry Hall, where in 1915 a poet got married. It was where one Vivian Eliot married the young T.S. Eliot. And as a bit of a diversion to our main script, it was also used in the films Georgie Girl in 1966 and Four Weddings and a Funeral 30 years later, but we're going off at a tangent here. Frederick, her father, died in 1898 without making proper provision for his family. And to make ends meet, Charlotte's mother had to take in lodgers. It was a sign of real social decline. And to Charlotte's mother in particular, who set great store by such outward appearance, it was an utter humiliation. These were the last few years of the reign of Victoria, who we can see represented all around the walls of this pub this evening. And in those days, and in that society, social appearance was everything. The Mew's mother, Anna, was as religious as any, but it was their housekeeper, Elizabeth Goodman, who was the bigger influence. Charlotte and her siblings, like all good Victorian children, were taught to kneel by their bed and say their prayers at the end of the day. But in addition, when they came to the section of the Lord's Prayer where the words, "Forgive us our trespasses," were reached, they had to list all their sins and transgressions of the day. That must have been a real focus and influence on Charlotte's mind. The family's financial difficulties were heightened not only by the death of the father, but also by the cost of caring for Charlotte's brother and sister. That sister, Frida, continued to live in a mental hospital until her death in 1958. Her brother, the elder son, Henry, died in 1901. It had been hoped that he would have taken over his father's profession and become breadwinner for the family. Alas, that was not the case. His mental collapse was severe. It started off as mere eccentricities in his behaviour, but it developed. He started masturbating compulsively and openly, and told his family that he could not stop. This was at a time when such behaviour was termed self-abuse and would surely lead to mental decay.
My parents read a paper by Dr. William Acton called Disorders of the Reproductive Organs. He stated, "That insanity is a consequence of this habit is now beyond doubt. The slouching gait, the clammy palm, the averted gaze, the glassy eye, all link the lunatic victim to this vice."
This vice, such was the medical wisdom in the closing years of the 19th century. Henry's deterioration progressed to full-blown delusions. He told his family that after they'd all gone to sleep, women were entering his bedroom and forcing him to have sex with him again and again. The family decided they had little choice but to send young Henry to Bethlehem Asylum on the other side of Southwark Bridge. It was no longer the bedlam, the nightmare world of half-naked chained lunatics, to use the vogue word of those days. The practical care was better. But the real nightmare was how much it would cost. The price of Henry's detention was ruinous. All this drama in the family home cannot have failed to contribute to Charlotte's sense of being distinct or different. And in this next poem, we see the sense of alienation creep in.
Afternoon tea. Please you, excuse me, good 5 o'clock people. I've lost my last hatful of words, and my heart's in the wood, up above the church steeple. I'd rather have tea with the birds. Gay Kate's stolen kisses, poor Barnaby's scars, John's losses and Mary's gains. Oh, what do they matter, my dears, to the stars or the glowworms in the lanes? I'd rather lie under the tall elm trees with old rooks talking loud overhead, to watch a red squirrel run over my knees, very still on my brackeny bed, and wonder what feathers the wrens will be taking for lining their nests next spring, or why the tossed shadow of boughs in a great wind shaking is such a lovely thing.
Here she is the odd one out, the one who doesn't belong, the one that is behind the door of life, the one that misses the party somewhere else. She's a solitary, a castaway. I will move to the next poem because her family tragedy and the consolation of religion are innately intertwined. The title says it all, To a Little Child in Death.
Dear, if little feet make little journeys, thine should not be far. Though beyond the faintest star, past earth's last bar, where angels are, thou hast to travel. Cross the far blue spaces of the sea, climb above the tallest tree, higher up than many mountains be. Sure, there is some shorter way for thee, since little feet make little journeys. Then, if smallest limbs are soonest weary, thou should soon be there, stumbling up the golden stair where the angel's shining hair brushes dust from baby faces. Very, very gently cling to a silver-edged wing and peep from under. Then thou'lt see the King, then will many voices sing, and thou wilt wonder. Wait a little while, for him to smile, who calleth thee, who calleth all, both great and small, from over mountain, star and sea, doth call the smallest soonest to his knee, since smallest limbs are soonest weary.
We've heard a lot about tragedy so far this evening, and for many people, probably to today, who face difficult situations at home, they find an escape in school or education. So let's hear now about a brighter, more positive aspect of Charlotte Mew's world, her education. So school was an escape from home, an education at the hands of her young teacher, the 22-year-old Miss Lucy Harrison, was very heaven. It was the Gower Street School for Girls near University College, London. Lucy Harrison did not subscribe to the increasingly common view in late Victorian times that young women should not be over-educated. Over-education is a dangerous thing. The level of mental stimulation required for young women could harm their delicate brains. Baron Hathaway was a member of Gladstone's cabinet when he came to open Leeds High School for girls, and went on with this. Medical men say there is not the same physical power in the brains of young women as there is in young men. There are cases of young women having become physically unwell as a result of having their studies pushed too far academically. Miss Lucy Harrison, 22 years old, at Gower Street School for Girls, had little time for this nonsense. She was evidently an inspiration to her young class in her style of teaching, in her natural confidence, and in the way she dressed. She wore a ribbon in her hair. She knew how to whistle. Charlotte adored her. Adored her and more? One of Charlotte Mew's biographers, Julia Copus, says there is considerable evidence that Lucy Harrison was gay. Which brings us to the question, was Charlotte Mew also gay? And if so, how far is that relevant to what she was writing about, or about to write? We can return to that subject later this evening, but for now, it is perhaps safe to assume that as a schoolgirl, Charlotte Mew may have adored her teacher, Lucy Harrison, but she was at this stage in her life unaware of any overt sexual feelings on that front. She was not much more, after all, than 11 years old. But she started to develop a manly fashion sense. She developed a chain-smoking habit. She rolled her own cigarettes. Her independence at a time when women were not considered as free as they are today have now turned her into a lesbian icon. And whatever Copus's evidence or lack of may suggest, this is well established today. Lucy Harrison, Miss Lucy Harrison, as well as being an inspirational teacher, was a great lover of poetry. She urged her young pupils not just to read poetry, but to embrace it and apply the insights they experienced from their readings to their daily lives. And this is from one of Mew's letter to a friend.
She told us what a happy world it would be if more people really took poetry to help them live and applied it to their lives. All the while, it is the supreme essence of life.
It seems Miss Lucy Harrison's words went deep into Charlotte Mew's consciousness. As we come to our first break, let's hear one of her most famous and longer poems, The Trees Are Down. The trees she refers to are London plane trees taken down in Ensley Gardens near Euston Station. The poem is predictable enough for much of its length. Charlotte Mew displays her sorrow at the felling of the trees. But in the final 5 lines, she brings us inside the trees as they lie dying on the grass. All the noise of the axe and the saw disappears, and reflection on the loss begins. And this is a poem that goes beyond the usual romantic pastoral into a serious concern on the damage we humans do to our environment, a true modern concern that resonates painfully today. In fact, it occurred to us preparing for this evening, it reflected on the felling of the London plane trees for the development of the HS2 station at Euston. So Di will now read The Trees Are Down.
The trees are down. They are cutting down the great plane trees at the end of the gardens. For days, there has been the grate of the saw, the swish of the branches as they fall, the crash of the trunks, the rustle of trodden leaves, with the whoops and the roars, the loud common talk, the loud common laughs of the men above it all. I remember one evening of a long past spring, turning in at a gate, getting out of a cart, and finding a large dead rat in the mud of the drive. I remember thinking, alive or dead, a rat was a godforsaken thing. But at least in May that even a rat should be alive. The week's work here is as good as done. There is just one bough on the roped bowl, in the fine grey rain, green and high and lonely against the sky, down now. And but for that, if an old dead rat did once for a moment unmake the spring, I might never have thought of him again. It is not for a moment the spring is unmade today. These were great trees. It was in them from root to stem when the men with the whoops and the wars carted the whole of the whispering loveliness away. Half the spring for me will have gone with them. It is going now, and my heart has been struck with the hearts of the plains. Half my life it has beat with these, in the sun, in the rains, in the March wind, the May breeze, in the great gales that come over to them across the roofs from the great seas. There was only a quiet rain when they were dying. They must have heard the sparrows flying, and the small creeping creatures in the earth where they were lying. But I, all day, I heard an angel crying, hurt not the trees.
Thank you, Diane. We'll take a quick break now, and when we'll come back, we'll hear what many consider to be her most famous poem, The Farmer's Bride.
I hope you are sufficiently recharged. Thank you. I hope that you're enjoying the readings. Thank you for coming again. Thank you, Diane. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Linda and Ian. We're going to sing a song at the end of this second part. Okay? I think you should take over.
Okay. So, just before the break, we talked about Charlotte Mew's ability to become someone else, or perhaps even something else. This was partly achieved because of her lively imagination. All good writers and poets possess this quality. But in Charlotte Mew, it was something more than that. There are two great biographies of our poet. They have somewhat different takes on her life, but they do have this in common. They both reflect Charlotte's lack of confidence in being herself. Remember how we started this evening when Alida Monroe approached her in that bookshop and asked if she was Charlotte Mew, and she said, "I'm afraid I am." Perhaps it was the reluctance to be herself that made impersonation all the easier. And in her most famous poem, The Farmer's Bride, she becomes someone else, quite convincingly. Not the bride of the farmer, that would be too easy. She becomes the farmer, and I warn you now, he's not a particularly likeable person to be. Not likeable perhaps, but Charlotte Mew seems amazingly understanding of his plight. She is a poet that, like Joni Mitchell, can see both sides now. The Farmer's Bride.
3 summers since I chose a maid, too young maybe, but more's to do at harvest time than bide and woo. When us was wed, she turned afraid of love and me and all things human. Like the shut of a winter's day, her smile went out, and 'twant a woman more like a little frightened thing. One night in the fall, she runned away. Out among the sheep her be, they said. She'd probably have been abed. But sure enough, she wasn't there, lying awake with her wide brown stare. So over 7-acre field and up along across the down we chased her, flying like a hare before our lanterns, to Churchtown. All in a shiver and a scare we caught her, fetched her home at last, and turned the key upon her fast.
She does the work about the house as well as most, but like a mouse. Happy enough to chat and play with birds and rabbits and such as they, so long as menfolk keep away. Not near, not near, her eyes beseech when one of us comes within reach. The women say that beasts in stall look round like children at her call. I've hardly heard her speak at all. Shy as a leveret, swift as he, straight and slight as a young larch tree, sweet as the first wild violets she, to her wild self. But what to me? The short days shorten, and the oaks are brown. The blue smoke rises from the low grey sky. One leaf in the still air falls slowly down. A magpie's spotted feathers lie on the black earth spread white with rye. The berries redden up to Christmas time. What's Christmas time without there be some other in the house than we? She sleeps up in the attic there, alone, poor maid. 'Tis but a stair betwixt us. Oh my God, the down, the soft young down of her, the brown of her, her eyes, her hair, her hair.
I have to say that
Yeah.
it's meant to be Wessex, not North Country.
Yeah, but Wessex comes later on, but I can only sustain that a small time. I'm happier with Sheffield.
Perhaps surprisingly, one of Charlotte Mew's biggest fans is the comedian, football fan, podcaster and raconteur Frank Skinner, who nearly came along this evening if we'd have given him more notice. He was certainly entertaining our bid at one stage. And if at the end of this evening you find yourself wanting to know more about Charlotte Mew, and certainly about this poem, then I really do recommend a podcast called Frank Skinner's Poetry Podcast. Certain logic to that. It's on Spotify. Everything's on Spotify, isn't it? He discusses this poem at length and concludes that the way the poem ends with its threat of yearning or sexual violence is troubling in so many ways. There's just a stare between us, the farmer says, and then reflects upon her body and appearance. The soft young down of her, the brown, her eyes, her hair. Frank Skinner says, I'm glad there is not another verse, because one suspects what is about to or could happen will not end well. But the poem ends there. Rafi and I have talked and argued a lot about this poem, and he says, and Rafi believes, that it could just be the farmer reflecting himself being at a loss and clueless, but many people see it as quite a troubling poem. What's interesting here is in this poem, in The Farmer's Bride, Charlotte Mew must have known that she was creating something new and different. She is someone that can put herself completely in the mind of others, a rare ability even today. And this poem lent its name to her first collection of poems, The Farmer's Bride, which was published in 1916 in the depths of the Great War. It was the only book published in her lifetime. For all her self-deprecation and lack of personal self-confidence, she was not a dullard or a shrinking violet. She had many friends and had an active social life. Julia Copas, we mentioned earlier this evening, who has penned the most recent biography, describes Charlotte Mew at the age of 23 like this. She was an attractive, intelligent, single woman, musically gifted, clever with words, and unusually dexterous. She was committed to the notion of never marrying, but not content to sit at home or watch life pass her by. She lived life to the full, attended lectures, socialised freely, and moved around the London scene, smoking her hand-rolled cigarettes. This at a time when it was considered an act of unambiguous rebellion. And it was this clever, confident, yet timid woman who came across Henry Harland, the socialite in Kensington, and started attending his at-homes in Cromwell Road. He was to become the editor of the Yellow Book in 1894. It was a forum, an outlet for new writers and poets. W.B. Yeats, Walter Sickert, Kenneth Graham, the author of The Wind and the Willows, among them. And as you can see from the cover here, this was intended to be a challenging, even provocative publication. The famous Aubrey Beardsley was the artist you can see on the front here. The aim of this book, or magazine, it was 272 pages long, was, in the words of Harland, to depart from the bad old traditions of periodical literature and to try something new. Harland wanted this magazine to be talked about, and it was. Silly, nonsense, unreadable, detestable were observations from 4 of the more established newspapers of the day. It was, in other words, the perfect platform, the perfect encouragement and background for Charlotte Mew, who was a rebel, to develop a more assertive voice. Like any other child of Victorian times, she was well acquainted with death. Her cousin Walter died only weeks before she completed her next poem. He was 53. Her father had died, and so too had her brother, who'd spent most of his life in that mental asylum we talked about earlier. Henry was just 36 years old. He was buried in Nunhead Cemetery, south of the river. Charlotte made Nunhead Cemetery the setting for one of her most piercing poems. But it's not addressed to her brother, who had died there, who was put to rest there, but again to a dead lover, and the snow that whipped round the funeral party in March 1901 has become, in this poem, the London rain.
It is the clay what makes the earth stick to his spade. He fills in holes like this year after year. The others have gone. They were tired and half afraid. But I would rather be standing here. There's nowhere else to go. I have seen this place from the windows of the train that's going past against the sky. This is rain on my face. It was raining here when I saw it last. There is something horrible about a flower. This, broken in my hand, is one of those he threw it in just now. It will not live another hour. There are thousands more. You do not miss a rose. One of the children hanging about pointed at the whole dreadful heap and smiled. This morning, after that is carried out, there is something terrible about a child. We were like children last week in the Strand. That was the day you laughed at me, because I tried to make you understand the cheap, stale chap I used to be before I saw the things you made me see. This is not a real place. Perhaps by and by I shall wake. Getting drenched with all this rain. Tomorrow I will tell you about the eyes of the Crystal Palace train, looking down on us, and you will laugh, and I shall see what you see again. Not here, not now. We said, not yet. Across our low stone parapet will the quick shadows of the sparrow fall. But still it was a lovely thing through the grey months to wait for spring, with the birds that go a-gypsying in the parks till the blue seas call, and next to these, you used to care for the lions in Trafalgar Square. We'll stand and speak for London when her bell of judgment tolls. And the gulls at Westminster, that were the old sea captain's songs. Today, again, the brown tide splashes step by step the river stair. And the gulls are there. By a month, we have missed our day. The children would have hung about round the carriage and over the way as you and I came out. We should have stood on the gulls' black cliffs and heard the sea and seen the moon's white track. I would have called, you would have come to me and kissed me back. You have never done that. I do not know why I stood staring at your bed and heard you, though you spoke so low, but could not reach your hands, your little head. There was nothing we could not do, you said, and you went, and I let you go. Now, I will burn you back. I will burn you through. Though I am damned for it, we two will lie and burn, here, where the starlings fly to these white stones from the wet sky. Dear, you will say, this is not I. It would not be you. It would not be you. If only for a little while you will think of it, you will understand. If you will touch my sleeve and smile as you did that morning in the Strand, I can wait quietly with you, or go away if you want me to. God, what is God? But your face is gone, and your hand. Let me stay here too. When I was quite a little lad at Christmas time, we went half mad for joy of all the toys we had. And then we used to sing about the sheep the shepherds watched by night. We used to pray to Christ to keep our small souls safe till morning light. I am scared. I am staying with you tonight. Put me to sleep. I shall stay here. Here, you can see the sky. The houses in the street are much too high. There is no one left to speak to there. Here, they are everywhere. And just above them, fields and fields of roses lie. If you would dig it all up again, they would not die.
So here again, Charlotte places her words in the mouth of a man. Here it's the mouth of a tormented clerk who watches the burial of the woman he loves, hesitating and almost pitiable. But the modernity of the image used, the view from the train, the city squares and streets, places her as a poet in the tradition of Charles Baudelaire, a modern poet rather than a romantic elegiac. She was never judgmental, perhaps because of the difficulties she'd already experienced in life as a result of knowing those afflicted with mental instability or with death. She was prepared to countenance a wide range of outlooks. In this next poem, called On the Asylum Road, she talks about meeting those who are inmates of the local asylum, a group she would presumably have known so well because of her connection with Henry. Presumably, these people would have been walking in the open air, under supervision, given the early 20th century perspective that fresh air was good for both physical and mental well-being. On the Asylum Road.
Theirs is the house whose windows, every pane, are made of darkly stained or clouded glass. Sometimes you come upon them in the lane, the saddest crowd that you will ever pass. But still we merry town or village folk throw to their scattered stare a kindly grin, and think no shame to stop and crack a joke with the incarnate wages of man's sin. None but ourselves in our long gallery we meet. The moorhen stepping from her reeds with dainty feet, the harebell bowing on his stem,
dance not with us. Their pulses beat to fainter music, nor do we to them make their life sweet. The gayest crowd that they will ever pass are we to brother shadows in the lane. Our windows too are clouded glass. To them, yes, every pane.
This poem uses the form of a quaint country lyric, and Wordsworth's To the Idiot Boy comes to mind, which in Muse hands becomes something quite new, a meditation on modern conditions of mental otherness is probably the best way of describing it. We hear her sympathy and her concern, both at the tragedy that it is for the sufferers and at the treatment that these people received from mainstream society in her day. It's a poem that probably resonates now more than it did then, for we are more aware of these issues, and psychiatry has advanced considerably, as has our understanding of what mental illness is and how to approach it, either with medication or therapy, or simply with more humane methods of keeping sufferers safe and in comfort, even if there is no hope of cure. She shows a modern sensitivity to present people with what we would now call different cognitive abilities, or indeed any other difference, be it gender, sexual orientation, or culture. Her poetry is modern just by dealing with these issues, but also because of the empathy she shows for those who are marginalised for being different. And I think it's worth comparing her approach with that of Virginia Woolf. I'm sure you've all heard of Virginia Woolf, of course. Virginia Woolf and Charlotte Mew had almost identical lifespans. They were born at the same time, they died at more or less the same time. They both committed suicide, actually, and we'll come to the different methods later. But Virginia Woolf also saw a group of people with mental difficulties walking towards her. And she wrote this to a group of people. She was on the towpath in West London, we don't know exactly where, but she wrote this. On the canal side, we met and had to pass a long line of imbeciles. The first was a very tall young man, just queer enough to look twice up, but no more. The second shuffled and looked aside, and then one realised that everyone in that long line was a miserable, ineffective, shuffling, idiotic creature with no forehead or no chin and an imbecile grin or a wild, suspicious stare. It was perfectly horrible. They should certainly be killed.
Wow.
Even if you know that final sentence is coming, it is still shocking. Now, it's not our job to damn Virginia Woolf this evening. She was really reflecting, actually, the prevailing attitude of her time. People did not understand this grouping. But I include the quote to reflect the general accepted perspective and contrast it with what we've just heard from Charlotte Mew. Let's move on. Let's now turn to À quoi bon dire, which in English roughly translates as what's the point? Is that right?
Yeah, what can we add? What can we say?
Why
say anything else?
Why say anything? What more can we say? À quoi bon dire?
So I have to keep that door open because she won't be able to get back in if you shut it.
Are we going to be locked in? I don't.
17 years ago, you said something that sounded like goodbye. And everybody thinks that you are dead. But I. So I, as I grow stiff and cold, to this and that say goodbye too. And everybody sees that I am old. But you. And one fine morning in a sunny lane, some boy and girl will meet and kiss and swear that nobody can love their way again. While over there, you will have smiled, and I shall have tossed your hair.
So, this is a poem about lost love and lost childhood, a lament, but also hopeful as it ends, the tossing of hair, with that image of sweetness. Sweetness that doesn't fade, the love that endures, the love that's incarnated in new lovers. Her writing's characterised by emotional restraint. She avoids flowery language, instead using simple, evocative words to convey deep emotion. This restraint amplifies the power of the poem's closing lines, as the speaker's love transcends the physical and temporal boundaries that separate them. Slowly, Charlotte's reputation grew. Sometimes she seemed almost resentful of the slightly higher public profile that it gave her. Maybe public profile is not quite the right phrase, but among those who read poetry and loved writing, her star was in the ascendant. And although she did not welcome this higher profile, she acknowledged that it gave her an opportunity to meet one of her heroes. Before I tell you who this hero is, we'll have another poem, a very short one, which is The Shade Catchers.
I think they were about as high as haycocks are. They went running by, catching bits of shade in the sunny street. "I've got one," cried sister to brother. "I've got two. Now I've got another." But scudding away on their little bare feet, they left the shade in the sunny street.
So, Charlotte's reputation, not long after the publication of the collection The Farmer's Bride, Virginia Woolf called her England's greatest living poetess. Folk word in those days. Ezra Pound and Siegfried Sassoon also hugely admired what she wrote. But perhaps the greatest writer of the time to admire her output was Thomas Hardy. Thomas Hardy. You can see Hardy's influence in the subject matter and tone of her poetry, which often affects this Wessex dialect. He especially liked the poem that Di's just read, The Shade Catchers. In turn, Charlotte admired Hardy immensely, and a newfound prestige afforded her the chance to meet him. Hardy was a grand old man of 78 at this stage, but he had read The Farmer's Bride over and over, and although he was now a near recluse in his life, he decided he really wanted to meet this exciting young poet. It nearly didn't happen. It was the autumn of 1918, the Great War was in its final stages. Charlotte arranged the meeting and the long train journey from London down to Dorchester, but at the last moment, Florence Hardy, Thomas's wife, wrote to Charlotte saying that her husband was suffering the most severe cold and that his doctors had ordered complete rest. It wasn't true. We know it wasn't true, because Florence Hardy wrote another letter to a friend a day later saying she was embarrassed to have to cancel Charlotte's visit, but they didn't have enough coal to heat the house properly, and thus they could not entertain visitors. World War I rationing meant that coal had to be preserved for the war effort, not used for heating the best drawing room. In December, though, and I think this gives some insight into the sort of person Charlotte Mew was, she took matters into her own hands. She wrote to Mr. and Mrs. Hardy saying she would travel to Dorchester. They could meet her if they liked. And when Mrs. Hardy warned about the lack of coal, Charlotte Mew offered her own solution in a follow-up letter to them.
My plan for meeting the knocks of winter is to forget there are such things as spring and summer. I will come the following Wednesday, unless I hear otherwise,
I shall be at Dorchester Station on December the 4th at 4:14 p.m.
You get the impression that steam trains in the early 20th century were a lot more reliable and punctual than they are today. Anyway, it was a successful meeting. Cole was found to heat the house, and indeed, so convivial was the event, the Hardys asked Charlotte to stay for 2 nights. Mrs. Hardy said Charlotte talked easily and incessantly about everything, and they became good friends. On returning to London, Charlotte sent Thomas Hardy a latest poem too. We'll talk more of Thomas Hardy after the next break, but to take us there, let me introduce Linda and Ian over here tonight, who will sing to us about the subject of mental well-being, of which we've heard so much this evening. Ladies and gentlemen, Linda and Ian.
It's so interesting to see the road to the asylum and that picture of a psychiatric hospital that's been left, I think. And I had a fortunate opportunity to gain access to my my mother's psychiatric hospital after they closed it, and they were refurbing it for some posh houses. And I took some pictures, and they're on the internet in a song I did called Stories, but it's just quite a coincidence. I was like, bloody hell, I thought it was one of mine there being used. Anyway, we'll share a song that's inspired by my mum and her journey. And I mentioned a phrase called the Electric Man. And I don't normally share this information, but as we're all in good company talking about, mental health, it's about the electric shock treatment that they receive. So it's called Ordinary Merchants. You think madness is pretty, baby, come sleep in its bed. You machine gun poet, you're just spitting out the shit that you've read, and it falls through my head. In the night it falls through my head. You think madness is pretty, she's a mistress she can't leave behind. When the electric man comes knocking, he kicks out the light in their eyes, leaves them behind. In the night it leaves them behind. But you were pretty once, your eyes are baby blue. And all the guys, those guys, God, they go crazy for you. But what can you do? What can you do? What can you do? What can you do? We're just ordinary merchants trading souls. You think madness is pretty as you dress for your nightly parades. Well, it's you're in a dream, 'cause they're in a world you can't play, 'cause it takes them away. Like a thief, it takes them away. You think madness is pretty, baby, come sleep in her bed. 'Cause it loves you, then hates you, and twists everything that you say. Takes them away. In the night, takes them away. But you were pretty once, your eyes are baby blue. And all the guys, those guys, God, they go crazy for you. You were a mother once, good mother once, I know, 'cause I felt it from you. But what can you do? What can you do? What can you do? What
what can you do? What can I say? I mean, if you didn't know Linda and Ian, remember you heard them here first. They're going to be playing in February in Dingwalls, where they actually presented this record, the album. You can buy it. You put Linda Moylan online, and you will be directed to her page, and you can buy the album there. But I would really, if you enjoyed the song, as I'm sure you have, she's playing in February in Dingwalls, isn't it?
Dingwalls too, I can't remember the date.
Yeah, anyway, we'll keep you posted, ghost our books, because we are birds of a feather flying together. Now you can go and have another drink, please! Thank you very much. And 10 minutes sharp, and we'll finish on the third part. Thank you very much. Now we carry on as we jump straight into the poetry as Di reads Sea Love.
So you get your Wessex accent on. Sea love. Tide be running the great world over. 'Twas only last June month, I mind, that we was thinking the toss and the call in the breast of a lover, so everlasting as the sea. Here's the same little fishes that sputter and swim, with the moon's old glim on the grey wet sand, and then no more to me, nor beat the wind, than the wind going over my hand.
So there you go, more of that West Country dialect. And I'm going to speak loudly to drown the music downstairs. And the influence of Thomas Hardy. It's a love poem, of course, and the West Country dialect used to distance Charlotte Mew herself from her personal feelings about love and lovers. It's in that poem, we're almost eavesdropping on a woman who returns to the same stretch of shoreline where previously she'd stood with her lover, believing their relationship to be permanent, and it wasn't. In just those 8 lines, Charlotte Mew gives us the story and the backstory too. It's a deft piece of storytelling, of narrative. She's aware of the fleeting pleasure, of joys, the impossibility of clinging to moments of bliss, how everything decays and flies away. But is it addressed to a man or a woman? And does it matter? And we do need to apply a very 21st century perspective to this debate, and to tackle the vexed question about her sexuality, and see the role that, incredibly, Thomas Hardy played in that. Mew's 2 modern biographers don't agree about her sexuality. Penelope Fitzgerald, writing about 25 years ago, sees lesbian relationships, or rather would-be lesbian relationships, running through her work and aspects of her life. Julia Copus, writing about 10 years ago, finds no real evidence for that, and she says nothing has ever been found that could be described as a love letter, but such flights of fancy occur when there's a vacuum surrounding a writer's private life. It's possible that there may have been no love life at all. And just to add to all the gossip and drama surrounding this subject, and to show that sex is not a 21st century obsession, Charlotte Mew had a much earlier admirer who put her pen to paper. This was called Mary Davidow. She compiled her observations on Mew in the late 1950s, when many of Charlotte Mew's acquaintances were still alive. She proposed that Charlotte Mew was heterosexual, and that indeed she had conducted an illicit affair with this man.
The all lecture. Very unlikely.
When this could have happened, Thomas Hardy was already married to his second wife. He was in his late 70s. I don't think any modern scholars give any credence to this at all, but it all adds to the soup of confusion that is Charlotte Muse of love life. I think it's safe to say now that 100 years after her death, it's unlikely we'll ever discover any new or further biographical material about Charlotte Muse. And so many details about her private life will remain a mystery. Perhaps silence the better for that. Could it be that this paradox between wanting success as a writer and the financial security it would bring and the loss of privacy would inspire her next poem? And could it be that this loss of privacy would shine an unwelcome light into her personal life? Her next poem is called Fame.
Sometimes, in the overheated house, but not for long, smirking and speaking rather loud, I see myself among the crowd, where no one fits the singer to his song, or sifts the unpainted from the painted faces of the people who are always on my stare. They were not with me when I walked in heavenly places. But could I spare in the blind earth's great silences and spaces the din, the scuffle, the long stare, if I went back and it was not there? Back to the old known things that are the new. The folded glory of the gorse, the sweet briar air, to the larks that cannot praise us, knowing nothing of what we do, and the divine, wise trees that do not care. Yet, to leave fame, still with such eyes and that bright hair, God, if I might! And before I go hence, take in her stead to our tossed bed one little dream, no matter how small, how wild. Just now, I think, I found it. In a field, under a fence. A frail, dead, newborn lamb, ghostly and pitiful and white. A blot upon the night, the moon's drop child.
And not many poets, writers, other than Charlotte Muse, would have compared a dead lamb to the moon's dropped child. I think that really, in that line, sums up the beauty of what she wrote. Financial security. A friend of mine who is a published poet said to me and Rafi, there's no money in poetry and there's no poetry in money. In fact, he has had some success and commercial success, but for the vast majority of scribblers in garrets and attics and in the vast, uncaring, intricate, rented world, poetry doesn't pay the bills. And so it was for Charlotte Muse. Henry's death meant that the bills for his incarceration had at least stopped. But her father, Frederick, was dead, and her sister, Frida, was in an asylum. There were big bills to be paid there, so what could she do? Moving to Old Kent Road or Whitechapel or Walthamstow, or anywhere on anywhere on that side of town was unthinkable. They needed to keep living in the relative affluence of West Central London. So after some reflection, Charlotte, who is now effectively head of the household, wrote to her cousin.
Oh, I had to read it from yours, sorry. Not this bit, Rafa.
All right.
Upon thinking over and over our future, we have decided that if it is in any way possible, we should like to let half of the house. Hereby, we could keep the greater part of the furniture and possess a good address, which is an advantage not to be overlooked, and be within reach of the few friends Mamma has left to her.
letting out part of your house or spare rooms to lodgers was in those days quite shameful. But it was less traumatic than swapping Bloomsbury for the brown side of the Monopoly board. And so, discreet adverts were posted and rooms were let out. But money continued to get tighter and tighter. Charlotte and her family were forced to rent out the majority of their property, and they themselves eventually confined their living to their basement alone. The Mew family told no one what they were doing. Like the mental illness endemic in their family, it became one more closely guarded secret.
Lend me a little while the key that locks your heavy heart, and I'll give you back, rarer than books and ribbons and beads bright to see, this little key of dreams out of my pack. The road beyond men's bolted doors, there shall I walk, and you go free of me, for yours lies north across the moors, and mine lies south to what seas. How if we stopped and let our solemn selves go by, while my gay ghost caught and kissed yours as ghosts don't do, and by the wayside this forgotten you and I sat, and were 22. Give me the key that locks your tired eyes, and I will lend you this one from my pack, brighter than coloured beads and painted books that make men wise. Take it. No. Give it back.
Here, the speaker asks the subject for the key that locks her heavy heart. This speaker is reminiscent of the speaker in The Farmer's Bride that we heard earlier. There's broken pining. It's essentially a piece of writing about love, hesitation, confusion, separation. One contemporary reviewer said it was a bittersweet poem where the poet cannot disentangle life or beauty from pain. And our poet had so many things locked up. 2 brothers to begin with, and a sister, and possibly, yes, her sexuality. Gerald Gould, the literary critic of The Observer, said this next poem of Charlotte Mew's was so beautiful, it was one of the most beautiful he could not yet ever read.
The Changeling?
The Changeling.
Toll no bell for me, dear father, dear mother. Waste no sighs. There are my sisters. There is my little brother who plays in a place called Paradise. Your children all, your children forever. But I, so wild, your disgrace, with the queer brown face, was never, never, I know, but half your child. In the garden at play, all day last summer, far and away, I heard the sweet tweet tweet of a strange newcomer, the dearest, clearest call of a bird. It lived down there, in the deep green hollow, my own old home. And the fairies say the word of a bird is a thing to follow. So I was away a night and a day. One evening too, by the nursery fire, we snuggled close and sat round so still, when suddenly, as the wind blew higher, something scratched on the windowsill. A pinched brown face peered in. I shivered. No one listened or seemed to see. The arms of it waved and the wings of it quivered. Ooh, I knew it had come for me. Some are as bad can be. All night long they danced in the rain, round and round in a dripping chain, threw their caps at the window pane, tried to make me scream and shout and fling the bedclothes all about. I meant to stay in bed that night, and if only you had left a light, they would never have got me out. Sometimes I wouldn't speak, you see.
or answer when you spoke to me, because in the long, still dusks of spring, you can hear the whole world whispering. The shy green glasses making laugh, the feathers grow on the dear grey dove, the tiny heart of the redstart beat, the patter of the squirrel's feet, the pebbles pushing in the silver streams, the rushes talking in their dreams, the swish, swish of the bat's black wings, the wildwood bluebell's sweet ting-tings, humming and hammering at your ear, everything there is to hear in the heart of hidden things. But not in the midst of the nursery, not. That's why I wanted to be quiet. Couldn't do my sums, or sing, or settle down to anything. And when for that I was sent upstairs, I did kneel down to say my prayers, but the king who sits on your high church steeple has nothing to do with us fairy people. Times I pleased you, dear father, dear mother, learned all my lessons and liked to play, and dearly I loved the little pale brother whom some other bird must have called away. Why did they bring me here? To make me not quite bad and not quite good. Why? Unless they're wicked, do they want, in spite, to take me back to their wet, wild wood? Now every night I shall see the windows shining, the gold lamps glow and the fire's red gleam, while the best of us are twining twigs and the rest of us are whining in the hollow by the stream. Black and chill are their nights on the wold, and they live so long and they feel no pain. I shall grow up, but never grow old. I shall always, always be very cold. I shall never come back again.
That poem, The Changeling, is unique in the sense that it's told from the perspective of a child who believes herself to be a fairy and longs to return to the fairy world. Again, the idea of not belonging, of not being here, of being, as the phrase goes, away with the fairies. The accuracy of the child's understanding is up for interpretation. The unreliable narrator is an integral part of this poem that makes reading it all the more entertaining. Since the child is entirely convinced of a connection to the fairy world, it is far easier for readers to suspend their disbelief and transport themselves to the world of the fairies. But of course, the writer is Charlotte Mew herself. Here we see her alienation from the world and even from her family. It is an apology for a difference and a demand for acceptance of it. The poem is almost existentialist and relates the idea of self and identity that she perhaps would have heard from her friend May Sinclair, a committed evangelist for Sigmund Freud, at a time when the great man's ideas were beginning to be known and discussed. Given the problems in her life, small wonder that Charlotte wished she could be in that other world. And all lives have to engage with reality to some degree, and several huge events did take place in her lifetime. The death of Queen Victoria, the sinking of the Titanic, and of course, the outbreak of the Great War. And each time, Charlotte Mew felt moved to write about them. Some think she wrote these poems more as a duty as a poet than anything else. And to be honest, her poems about the Titanic and the death of the Empress Queen Victoria are not among her best works. But her poems about World War I have been widely praised. She wasn't a war poet in any sense that we might apply that description to Siegfried Sassoon, or Wilfred Owen, or even maybe Edward Thomas. But in two of her short poems, she demonstrates a sensitivity to the horrors of the trenches and the Somme, and in characteristic style, relates them to both nature and to God. The first of the two is May 1915.
May 1915.
Let us remember, spring will come again to the scorched, blackened woods, where the wounded trees wait with their old wise patience for the heavenly rain. Sure of the sky, sure of the sea to send its healing breeze, sure of the sun, and even as to these, surely the spring, when God shall please, will come again, like a divine surprise to those who sit today with their great dead, hands in their hands, eyes in their eyes, at one with love, at one with grief, blind to the scattered things and changing skies.
And she followed that poem with June 1915, which for me was the first Charlotte Mew poem I'd ever read, and it's still, I find, very effective these days.
Who thinks of June's first rose today? Only some child, perhaps, with shining eyes and rough bright hair will reach it down in a green sunny lane. To us, almost as far away as are the fearless stars from these veiled lamps of town. What's little June to a great broken world with eyes gone dim from too much looking on the face of grief, the face of dread? Or what's the broken world to June and him, of the small eager hand, the shining eyes, the rough bright head?
Here she talks about death on a massive scale, not a grave in the suburban cemetery of Nunhead. This is death, anonymous, collective, an incomprehensible carnage that had never been known in previous human history. Our poet watched it from afar, men fighting across the sea, across the English Channel in the trenches. The news reached her in newspapers, and she felt compelled to respond with these two gems, up there with the best of World War I poetry. Slowly, slowly, Charlotte's only publication, The Farmer's Bride, continued to sell, so much so, in fact, that her publishers, Harold and Leda Munro, prepared a second edition, and an edition that would be marketed in America, though across the Atlantic it would be called Saturday Market, not The Farmer's Bride. And because this new edition would be published in hardback, her publishers wanted new material. Charlotte obliged. This next poem, I have been through the gates, is again about loss, but many have taken it to be the collective loss of the generation that saw so many fall in the Great War.
I have been through the gates. His heart, to me, was a place of palaces and pinnacles and shining towers. I saw it then as we see things in dreams. I do not remember how long I slept. I remember the tress and the high white walls and how the sun was always on the towers. The walls are standing today, and the gates. I have been through the gates. I have groped. I have crept back. There is dust in the streets and blood. They are empty. Darkness is over them. His heart is a place where the lights gone out, forsaken by great winds and the heavenly rain, unclean and unswept, like the heart of the holy city, old, blind, beautiful Jerusalem, over which Christ wept.
We've met Christ, Christianity, God many times in the poems this evening, and as we draw to a close, it's important that we do dwell on religion. It was central to life in Victorian Britain, of course, and pervaded social and political life to a degree that's hard to imagine today. People from all classes went to church. Sunday observance was expected. Charlotte Mew herself was ambiguous about religion. She never quite professed atheism, and she certainly rejected the traditional religious emphasis on eternal life. Given the traumas of her personal life and the mental illness of her family, it would have been surprising if she'd accepted the idea of a benevolent or merciful God. And if she had been a true believer, it could have created a different end story for her. As it was, that end came soon. Her only close living relative, her sister Anne, succumbed to cancer and died in June 1927. She was just 53. Charlotte told her friends the death was not a problem because it was the end of problems. But that was for public consumption. She herself was inconsolable, unable to sleep. Her decline ended in March 1928. At a local chemist, she bought a bottle of Lysol disinfectant. Lysol was marketed as a relatively new, safe substitute for Victorian popular disinfectants like carbolic acid. But it was far from risk-free, and in quantity, and when taken internally, it could be deadly. A podcast came out last month called The Strange Story of Lysol. On Spotify, as I say, everything is on Spotify. This was on Spotify too. And I was listening to it knowing I was going to be coming to this evening. It talks about how Lysol, when first administered to hospital patients in 1912, that was the year it was first marketed and commercialised, the patients would scream from the burns they received. Well, you can imagine what that would do, taken internally. It soon became a known and common cause of suicide. Charlotte Mew went back to her room, drank it neat, and would have died within the hour of consumption. She was 58 years old. After her death, her friend Alida Munro, the same Alida Munro who had approached her in the bookshop at the beginning of our evening, collected her poetry for publication and issued The Rambling Sailor in 1929. These were poems that had not been previously published. On its publication, the contemporary reviewer said this: Charlotte Mew has a depth of quality and stillness. No English poet has less pretensions, and few a genuine claim to be in touch with the source of poetry as she had. All of us who are optimists must reflect on her end. Yes, people suffer, hearts break, loneliness hurts, and unfulfillment deadens us. But Charlotte Mew's voice is distinctive and fearless. Her star is rising, and if we can all gather in this pub again in, say, 20 years' time, we will, I'm sure, see her star shine still brighter. Thank you very much.
That was the show tonight. I mean, I hope that you liked it. She is published by different publishers. An anthology is going to come next year, published by Renard Press, run by a friend of mine. So, thank you very much. And I just want now to maybe, if you've got any question or something to discuss, something to comment, not discuss, or something to say, but we like to, to hear what you think of what you've heard today. So let us know. If anybody wants to say. Well, I agree with you that after all this, it's difficult to say anything, but. I must have apologized because at the beginning we advertised this as having Sarah Warder, who is a wonderful poet, alive, modern poet, Sarah Warder. I don't remember her name. She is a brilliant poet who has written about mental health issues that she suffers. And I met her. She was willing to come here and read some of her poems because it goes very well with the topic, no, that Linda's song and Charlotte Muse approach, early sympathy for. Sadly, Sarah is not well. She has to go to hospital, and she couldn't come here, no. But her poems about mental health are absolutely fantastic because she's so aware of what's going on that she writes about it, and she writes about it beautifully and very cleverly. She's an Oxford graduate, which, I mean, I don't mean that you have to go to Oxford to write well or anything, but what I mean is that she's that kind of person, and she is suffering from schizophrenia, like the siblings of Charlotte Mule, and she's so aware of what's going on in her brain. She knows it's an illness. It's something, configuration of the brain or something. And I really recommend. She sadly cannot be here because she's having an episode, and I would like to dedicate the evening to her because she was very willing to come here. She simply can't. And on that note, I would like to finish the evening, unless you have anything to say about this. Otherwise, we'll finish the evening here. And thank you very much.